G'day, mate. This is the Do and Teach Guy podcast. Quick disclaimer, everything I say is my opinion or interpretation only, and is based on my logic, research, and convictions. All scriptures are read from the New King James Version. So veg out and let's give it a bash. This is episode 1, but before we begin, I just want to give a little intro to what this podcast is all about. Basically, I'll be going through different parts of the Bible and sharing my opinion on what I think it might be saying, which is often not exactly the same as how the modern church sees it. I'm sure some of the things that I mention might not be biblically accurate, but at least hearing my thoughts might get you thinking in a new way. I find that the modern church has lost the ability to think for themselves. Of course, I'm not talking about you, listener, but other Christians. They usually just listen to what others tell them and don't think about it for themselves. But when they stand before God one day, and a bunch of the stuff that they believed was wrong, will the excuse of, I was just doing what they told me to do, really work? If you believe a lie without looking into it yourself, then that's on you. In this podcast, I won't be reminding you to subscribe and share and like and comment and all that stuff. It always seems forced when people keep repeating it. You know what you're doing. I trust you. I also won't be asking for money. I think your money is better spent helping the poor and widows around you than sending it to some stranger on the internet. I'll try not to waste your time by repeating things and waffling on, but I would recommend that you listen to all these episodes in order because I won't be re-explaining topics and theories when they come up in other episodes. This will probably happen more than you think, because from my experience, everything is connected to everything. Anyway, on to the topic. A parable? Today we're talking about the book of Job, a mysterious book that archaeologists and scholars know next to nothing about. They don't know when it was written, who wrote it, or where it was meant to take place. So, upon much investigation, I put it to you that this mysterious book could be a parable book. Maybe no man called Job ever existed. When was it written? If this book is not a parable, then when could it have been written? It's obviously very early in creation, and it could have even been before the flood. There are two things I want to talk about on this topic. The first revolves around Job's age, and the second is about the dinosaurs. Job's age question. In the last chapter of this book, it discusses Job's age. Chapter 42, verses 16 and 17. After Job lived 140 years, and saw his children and grandchildren for 4 generations, so Job died old and full of days. Job lived 140 years after his little trial. He would have been at least 20 when he started having kids, then at least another 20 or 30 years would have passed for those kids to grow up and move out. That puts Job's lifespan at about 180 years or more. Based on the rapid decline of ages after the flood, more about that in another episode, Job couldn't have lived after Moses. But then again, if this story did take place before the flood, and if Job only lived 180 years, then he would have died pretty young. So it's more likely that Job just waited decades or even centuries before he had kids in the pre-flood world that he lived. Dinosaur sizes. The other thing that puts this book before the flood is the size of the dinosaurs. But to talk about that, we need to go into a fairly long sidetrack. The ice dome theory. The whole dinosaur size thing is based on another theory, so it's time to talk about the ice dome theory. The theory says that there was a thick layer of ice surrounding the entire Earth before the flood. This dome would have been in the upper atmosphere, much higher than any birds would have flown. This is theoretically where all the rain could have come from when the windows of heaven opened during the flood, the ice layer melting slowly over 40 days and 40 nights. But we'll get into all of that in another episode. Is this ice dome in the Bible? No. But it's a good theory that explains a few things that's described in Genesis. There is a passage that some people use to say that the ice dome is in the Bible, and that's Genesis 1, verse 7. Thus God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. This firmament word is what I think they all base it on. And it could be talking about the ice dome, dividing the waters under and above. But if we keep reading, we find out a little more. And God called the firmament heaven. So the evening and the morning were the second day. It calls the firmament heaven. This could either be talking about the first heaven, meaning the sky, or the heaven, which is the dimension where God lives. If it is talking about the sky, then the waters are actual waters, the wet stuff. But if it is talking about the heavenly dimension, then the waters could represent splitting the physical dimension from the spiritual dimension. It uses the word waters instead of trying to explain the whole spirit world thing so early on. This passage is, after all, just a summation of the process, not a detailed account. But I guess both of these two things could be true at the same time, but you can decide that for yourself. The splitting dimensions thing does conflict with another theory of mine, but we're going to discuss that in another episode on Adam and Eve. Basically, the theory says that the physical and spiritual world were not split until after the fall. Let's keep going on to see if we can find out more. Verse 9. Then God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. This is clearly when the land was made, but it used the word waters again, and this time it is definitely talking about the wet stuff. Does that mean that the waters was actually mud? Who knows? Before getting back to the dinosaurs, I'll just go through a few arguments against the ice dome while I'm talking about it. Some people say that you may not be able to see the sun, the moon, and the stars through the ice dome, but this is easily explained. See, if you put some water in the freezer, it freezes. This ice usually has the top all cloudy and white, but the bottom half is perfectly see-through. This cloudy bit has little air bubbles trapped in it. All the air bubbles floated to the top, so the bottom was clear. There is a much more scientific answer to this, but you can look that up for yourself. Now, since the ice dome would have been high up in the atmosphere, there wouldn't have been much air up there to get frozen in it, so it would have been clear regardless of its thickness. Another objection would be that asteroids hitting the ice could crack it or even break the dome. But I would say that if an asteroid were to hit during the 1500 odd years that the ice dome might have been there, then God would have had to create that asteroid to hit it. So it's simple enough logic to say that God wouldn't have made those asteroids in the first place. Anyway, back to the dinosaur thing. There must have been something very different about the pre-flood world, and it has something to do with this mist that the Bible mentions later on in Genesis 2, verses 5 and 6. Before any plant of the field was in the earth, and before any herb of the field had grown, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the earth, and there was no man to till the ground. But a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. This passage suggests that there was no rainfall before the flood, but only this mist. It kind of reminds me of a terrarium. If there was an ice dome up there, then this passage would make a lot more sense. Effectively, the ice dome would have turned the Earth into a giant hyperbaric chamber. This hyperbaric chamber effect would allow things like dinosaurs to grow much larger in size. Dinosaurs are reptiles, and some reptiles grow bigger based on their age. So, all the dinosaurs would have to do to get as big as we see them in the fossil record would be to live for a long time. This is not unreasonable, since people at that time were living to almost 1,000 years anyway. Sidetrack: Hyperbaric Chamber. For those who don't know, a hyperbaric chamber is a chamber with a higher pressure atmosphere in it and a higher oxygen content. Sports teams sometimes use them to help heal their players' injuries faster, and they're also used a lot for divers to overcome decompression sickness. Interestingly, if you ran on a treadmill inside one of these hyperbaric chambers, your muscles would never get tired. The higher oxygen content can continuously supply your muscles so they never lose their strength. Also, studies have been done that show that when you grow veggies in these environments, they grow bigger and faster. So this growth boost would have helped the dinosaurs live longer and get really big. Some dinosaur experts say that the nose on a T-Rex was too small to supply enough oxygen to their system. So if there was a full-size T-Rex alive today, it wouldn't be very scary, because all it would be doing is gasping for breath while lying on the floor. However, if they were in a hyperbaric chamber-like environment, then this wouldn't be an issue. So, when baby dinosaurs got off the ark, and yes, dinosaurs were in the ark, and yes, they were probably babies to save room, but we'll talk about that in another episode on Noah's flood. When they got off the ark, they wouldn't have grown up as big as their pre-flood ancestors, and if they did, then people would have easily hunted them down for trophies. Most likely, a lot of the bigger dinosaurs would have been the first animals to become extinct due to man's mismanagement of the earth. But on a brighter note, When Earth 2.0 is established, which we'll talk about in another episode, we'll probably get to see all the dinosaurs again and at their full size. But don't be too worried, they'll also be all herbivores and tame. Cool. So, if Job was after the flood, the dinosaurs wouldn't have been as big and impressive as described by God in Job 40 verses 15 to 18. Look now at the behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now, his strength is in his hips, and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar, and the sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze, and his ribs like bars of iron. Satan in heaven? Anyway, back to the parable theory. There's one main reason, besides the lack of historical evidence, that I think that the book of Job could be a long parable. Keep in mind that I believe the book of Job is the only book in the Bible that could be a parable. Every other book is written about real people in real places, so I'm not trying to say that the whole Bible is just made up. This reason is centered around the point in the story where Satan enters heaven to chat with God alongside the other angels. I believe that Satan's fall from grace was just after Adam and Eve were tricked into eating the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This idea is fleshed out in another episode on the fall of man. But to sum up the conclusion, Satan can no longer enter the presence of God. If he did, he would be burned up from God's glory just like we would. I think this is what Ezekiel 28 verse 18 is talking about. You defiled your sanctuaries by the multitude of your iniquities, by the iniquity of your trading. Therefore I brought the fire from your midst. It devoured you, and I turned you to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all who saw you. The bringing the fire from within him could be his righteousness. It's also probably what protected him from God's sun-like glory. That's not to say that Satan can't still talk or pray to God, like it suggests in Luke 22 verse 31. And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, indeed, Satan has asked for you, that he may sift you as wheat. Satan asked for Simon, but it doesn't say that he was in heaven face to face when he asked for him. I believe that God only listens to prayers from the righteous, like in 1 Peter 3 verse 12. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. However, when a demon or an unrighteous person's prayers are in line with God's will, or if answering their prayers brings God more glory, then I'm pretty sure that he will answer those prayers. I think that Satan being in heaven must make this book a parable. But just because this could be a parable doesn't mean that it's any less true. Like the parable that Jesus told about Lazarus in the flames of torment. It never happened, it was just a story to get his point across. Jesus spoke almost entirely in parables, and God and Jesus are one. So it's not unreasonable to think that God could tell a parable too. What's the point of Job? I think that God wrote the book of Job very early on in creation. And by rote, I mean that he told it to one of his followers via a vision or just audibly. That person then remembered it and passed it on to everyone else. I think it might have been used as a sort of bedtime story. Kids would have heard it growing up, then they passed it down to their kids, generation to generation, until someone put it down on paper, or whatever they used at the time for writing. How would they remember 42 chapters worth of story off the top of their heads, you ask? Well, I will touch on that throughout these podcast episodes, but people were much smarter back then, possibly many times smarter than us today. Could we build the pyramids now as well as they did back then, even with all of our technology doing most of the work for us? No, I don't think so. Anyway, even if the Chinese whispers effect kicked in, I'm sure that God would have corrected any deviations for the version that ended up in the Bible. What is Job about? This leads me to the question of what the book of Job is all about. I think people have been debating this for years, and they often change their mind every time they read through it. But I put it down to this, or these things. God can use evil to test his followers. He also allows bad things to happen to good people. These are tests. If you pass the test, you get a bigger crown in the resurrection, and you get drawn closer to God. Also, you then get trusted with more responsibilities. If you fail the test, you discover that your faith is not quite as strong as you thought it was, and you get drawn closer to God anyway. It's a win-win for him. This is kind of shown in the book of Job, when at the end he gets back more stuff than when he started. This could represent the rewards in the resurrection. Another lesson that the book teaches us is that, like Job, you can be very obedient to the law, but if your heart is in the wrong place, your obedience is worth nothing. There's also elements that show that God's ways are higher than our ways, and it also tells us not to listen to bad advice from others, especially when they tell you to curse God and die. There's a lot we can get out of this book. Jesus' parables were only a couple of lines long and contained deep lessons. Job is 42 chapters long. There's bound to be many lessons in it. Give the book another read through and make up your own mind if it could be a parable or not. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. I pray that your faith grows, but more importantly, that it's shown through your life and your actions. Catch ya.